this is the time for peak Daniel Highshaw to show up. Don't be worried about, hey, we don't want to give him 20 carries. We don't. The season's over if you lose today, and it's his final game as well. Give that guy the ball and see what he can do, and see if you can enjoy success in the run game.
Pay heed all who enter and beware this podcast. That's right. This is a paid podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible. Member FDIC. Today's show, we're going to be talking about KU football as they prepare for their final game of the regular season against Utah on Black Friday. This is a good chance to remind you that we're going to be live after the KU Utah game. We at the start of the year, I told you we're going to be live, rain, shine, no matter what the situation is. Every game will be live, and that's been true the entire season, and it will continue to be true on Friday afternoon on Black Friday because we will be live after the game against Utah on our YouTube channel for our post-game reaction. You can subscribe at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN so that you'll be notified when we go live on Friday afternoon. So maybe if you are watching the game, doing some Black Friday shopping, whatever, you can join us live on our YouTube channel for our post-game reaction show on Friday afternoon between KU and Utah. And if you are on YouTube, you should be commenting on the video, liking the video, and subscribing to the channel regardless. If you're listening on audio, you can subscribe as well and leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you get your podcasts to help us grow the channel. Before we dive into KU basketball, we're recording this on Monday nights. We'll talk more KU, or before we dive into KU football, I should say. We're recording this on Monday night. KU basketball got a win against Notre Dame in the Players Era earlier this afternoon on Monday. They're going to play Syracuse. If you're listening to this on Tuesday morning, this afternoon, or if you're listening to this later in the week, then high future you, and also tell me how KU did against Syracuse if you can. But we'll talk a little bit more KU basketball. The plan is we'll probably do a little bit more of a holistic recap of KU at the Players Era later this week into the weekend. Also previewing KU and UConn, which is coming up next Tuesday. So that'll be a big game. And we are planning on right now being live after that game as well for KU and UConn. So it's a Tuesday night game. It'll be a late night again, but I think the plan is for us to be live on our YouTube channel after that game as well, breaking down that one. And I have a hunch, hopefully, that one Darren Peterson may play in that game, which I think will make it very exciting for KU fans. So you'll maybe want to join us for that one after the KU UConn game next Tuesday. But again, we're going to talk more KU basketball. We'll talk more about the Players Era kind of holistically later in the week. Today's show is going to be focused on previewing KU and Utah, the last game of the regular season for Kansas. Let's dive into it, Kevin. I think it's, for me, the biggest storyline or the biggest thing we're looking for in this game, quite frankly, is just simply what kind of fight does KU have? What does KU have left in the tank for this game? It's been obviously a disappointing season, I think, for Kansas. You really hope to get to a bowl game. They still have that opportunity with this game against Utah, even though Utah seems to be a pretty formidable opponent. But just, I guess that's what I'll be looking for the most, is just simply, what does this team have left? How much fight do they have left after this? How the season's gone heading into this last game.
Yeah, we had a chance to talk to Lance Leipold earlier today, and one of the things that I asked him was, is this a culture game? And what I meant by that basically is Kansas got a lot of kudos for its culture a year ago, Nick, when a lot of things didn't go well. They had a lot of heartbreaking losses, and everybody stayed 10 toes in the sand, right? And basically ripped off 3 straight wins over ranked teams. And I think that was a good example of, even though a lot of their goals were not still available to them, the fact that they were able to refocus and say, you know what, we have a lot of pride. We're going to come out and compete at a really high level. That was a big check mark in their culture category. This one is similar to me, Nick, in that you're coming off of a couple heartbreaking losses for different reasons. The Arizona game was heartbreaking because you had every chance to win it. The Iowa State game was heartbreaking because Kansas wasn't that far away from Iowa State, but was a long ways away on the scoreboard. And, we've talked about Parker, who does the, did we really get beat that bad, and the net success rates. It did not surprise me that Kansas had a higher success rate than Iowa State in that game. That's what happens when you have empty possessions like KU had, where you go down the field, you turn the ball over in the red zone, you miss a field goal, you don't have the end product. And that's what happens on the flip side when you're getting teams into third down situations where they aren't necessarily having a ton of success on first and second down. You're getting them into third down, you're getting them into fourth down, and you're not able to get stops on those situations. And so you had a game where Kansas, again, had a better success rate than Iowa State, and he would lose by 24. And so coming after that is a quick turnaround. The cultural part for me is, hey, if you take a lot of pride in being able to flush the previous result, dust yourself off, get back to work, really focus and game plan and do all the things you need to do during the week, and then come out and compete at a high level on Friday. That was what I asked about it. And so I'm right there with you. I think that this is a game that if Kansas comes out and really does compete, really battles, takes to coaching this week, trusts the teaching that those players are getting, and maybe even plays with a little bit of that added edge that you can sometimes see on a senior night. I think it's something that whether Kansas wins or loses, and I'm not trying to say, hey, it's a moral victory type thing, because it's not. But if Kansas does that part of it, I think it'll be another check mark in okay, you're building good culture within this program, because I do think it would be easy to roll over. The hard part would be to get back up and battle on Friday.
Well, that's kind of what I wanted to follow up with you on, is like, I wonder how much of a difference that really makes in terms of the big picture, right? Like, if you go out against Utah and just get curb stomped and it's, 38-3 or 38-10, whatever, versus it's you battle and it's a close game and maybe you lose again in sort of annoying fashion, i.e. like the Arizona game, or you have a drive late that you don't convert and you lose, by a couple points or whatever it may be, by one possession. Like, does that really make a huge difference in your mind? Like, going forward, just big picture wise? I mean, if you lose, you lose, and you're not going to a bowl, right? So I guess in your mind, do you think that would actually make a huge difference for this team heading into the offseason?
I don't necessarily know that it would make a huge difference going into the offseason. I think it would just be another indicator that the culture part is strong, right? The thing that would make a big difference in the offseason, Nick, is winning this football game and going to a bowl, getting the practices that go along with that. And, college football, you're not in the business of moral victories. And one of the things that I always respected about Lance Leipold early on in his career, Nick, he didn't take moral victories. When they would lose to somebody like Oklahoma the way that it went, or, you think about TCU game on game day, right? KU hadn't had a level of success. You wind up starting the season 5-0. TCU is undefeated. You lose a close game to TCU where Jalen gets hurt, and you wind up having your backup quarterback for the rest of the game. It would have been very easy for Lance Leipold to be like, well, gosh, like, our starting quarterback got hurt. We hung around with a really good team. But what he actually said was we needed to play a cleaner football game and we would have won. And so I've always respected his ability to not take moral victories and to look at, okay, they are process driven. I'm not going to say that they're results driven. They're process driven. But at the same time, it is very much a results driven business. And I think they see that, and they aren't in a spot where they hang around with Utah and they lose 35-32 or something like that on a late field goal or anything like that. I don't think that Lance would be at that press conference afterwards being like, well, we gave it a good shot, we just lost. I think he would say, well, we didn't do this right, or we didn't do that right. And so in the grand scheme of things, the win is the important part. But I do think when you're looking at, we've talked a lot about, the strengths of Lance Leipold, and people have talked about maybe the weaknesses or the things that they don't think he does as well. One of the things that I've always put in his plus column, as you know, Nick, is that cultural part. I do think that they do a nice job of getting guys to refocus and kind of go back out and compete, even when it's coming after a string of bad results or results that you wouldn't have wanted. I think that's something that they do well. And I think that if Kansas comes out and makes this a game, really battles, it's not a positive result if you wind up losing, but it is sort of another nudge in that, okay, like the culture is not the issue here. The culture is something that they are doing right.
It is a bit ironic that there is a certain coach who just a few days ago against Utah did essentially try to pitch it as a victory despite them losing the game. I'm talking about K-State, of course, against Utah. But yeah, I mean, you're right. It is a results-driven business. And obviously, the human aspect of it is very much there, right? Like these are guys that have the process that are trying to get there. And I acknowledge that if you focus too much on the results, then you're going to end up firing. I mean, there's so many different examples of programs that focus so much on that and nothing else that they have ended up making bad coaching decisions and firing coaches and have gone into, tailspins. There's a lot of examples of that. So don't get me wrong on that. Yeah. But you're right. It is one of those things where it still feels kind of empty, I think, if you're Kansas, barring a win, right? Yeah. And I do agree with you, though. The culture aspect is important. That is one of the things that we've talked about on the show quite a bit. Is again, I've said it many times over the course of this season that I think Lance Leipold was probably the best hire KU could have made in 2021 because of that aspect of him, because of the fact that he is a culture builder. And in 2021, that's exactly what Kansas needed, was somebody to build a culture and to build, the program back to being competitive. But now you are here, and Lance Leipold talked about this on Monday as well. The expectations have been raised, right? And so you have to take the next step. And unfortunately, it didn't really happen for Kansas in 2024, off the heels of a 9-win season the previous year, and it hasn't happened for them really this year either. Sitting at 5-6 with a pretty daunting game in front of them to try to get to a potential bowl. And they add in the fact that, this is a Black Friday game, 11 a.m., probably not going to be very many students because it's Thanksgiving break. Kind of given how these last couple of weeks have gone for Kansas, you wonder just in general about what the atmosphere will be. And, it's unfortunate because there's a laundry list of seniors on this roster that have been here, that have, stuck around. Obviously, it starts with Jalen Daniels, but it goes much beyond that. A guy like Keenan Caldwell, a guy like Daniel Highshot, who's obviously battled through. Like, there's a lot of guys on this team that deserve a proper send off, and so, I hope that KU fans recognize that. But yeah, it's going to be a bit of a tough spot from that standpoint as well for Kansas, just in terms of the timing of it, kind of how things have gone recently for KU, and what that atmosphere may be.
Yeah, it stinks because you had a really strong senior group last year that played a big part in all of this, obviously, as well, with Devin Neal. And you have that senior night at Arrowhead Stadium. Yeah. And then here you have it at the new booth, and it's coming on Black Friday. Like you said, students aren't going to be there. You're coming off of a couple losses, and Kansas fans are notoriously skittish. And I'm not insulting them when I say that. I think they've got plenty of reason to be skittish.
Yeah, I don't think that's
based on recent history. And so I think that when you add all those factors together, it does stink, because this is a senior group that I think, even beyond the on-field stuff, which is what your average fan sees, Nick, we get to talk to these guys. And I think you really notice the types of kids that a lot of these are, the types of men that they've grown to be in a lot of cases. Lance Leipold talked today about how, one of the most fulfilling things that he's had has been watching Daniel Highshot grow over the last year. Jim Zabrowski talked about the maturation of Kobe Rhymes over the course of
Kobe Baines.
Kobe Baines. Sorry. I'm in recruiting mode with National Signing Day coming up.
Yeah, so. If anybody's wondering, Kobe Rhymes is a pretty talented high school
a terrific 2027 linebacker for North Kansas City. Kobe Baines. He talked about the maturation of Kobe Baines and sort of watching that and seeing that. We've all seen Jalen's star kind of play out in front of everybody. And Nick, I know you and I remember him getting absolutely destroyed in 2020, from a team that couldn't protect him. It was a team that really struggled anyways. And the toughness he showed through all of that for the new era stuff, to getting the MAC in the bowl, and then the injury stuff that he had to deal with, and all of the things that went there. And then the rust last year and all the things that went with that. And then this year having a mostly pretty good year, but, with some downs and some valleys in there. I know that's all a really long way to say, but basically you would love for these guys to get the sort of loving send off, where fans say, "Hey, thank you for what you did to Kansas football," because Kansas was not in a good spot. And DK McDonald maybe put it the best today, as a guy who's only been here a couple years or whatever, but he says, I have so much respect for these seniors because they were sold on a dream. You didn't have a history of bowl games. You didn't have a history of success that you could point to and say, that's going to be what's going to happen when you get here. These guys joined up believing that they were going to be the group that brought Kansas kind of out of the shadows. And those guys, for the most part, really did it. And you can complain about, hey, Kansas is 5-6, potentially 6-6, 5-7, but at the same time, you look at a fact that they had gone more than a decade without ever winning 3 games in a season. They hadn't gone to a bowl game since 2008. All of the things that went along with that, and there's no doubt that this is a group that helped elevate the Kansas program from where it was when they came in.
Yeah, 100%. And just sort of tangentially related to that, and something that I thought about is like, I do think the ushering in of NIL and, all that has maybe taken away a little bit of that compassion from fan bases.
For
just
sure.
Across the country, right? Of, hey, it's a really great story of watching these young men develop into players, into young men over the period of a couple years in a program. That compassion for that, I think, has dwindled a little bit, because now it is more, the business side of it is so significant. And look, I'll be the first to admit, I don't totally love that. Like I don't love that aspect of it, but I think it is a reality that you sit in now, where just because of that fact that, knowing these are players that in many cases are rightfully, receiving money as they probably should, versus what it was before. But also I think that adds to a certain level of scrutiny that maybe some fans take into when it comes to these types of things. So, but I agree with everything you said. You'd love to see these young men have an opportunity to go out feeling the support from a fan base and program that they've really, really helped build to what you described as something that where the expectations are higher now, right? I mean, in 2017, everyone would have been tap dancing over a 5-7 season. In 2016, all those years, you would have been over the moon about a 5-7 season. But now we're to a point where the expectations are a little bit higher, and so that's why this year feels a little disappointing. But even still, those guys, a lot of those guys still deserve that credit for being a part of raising those expectations. So, but one way to sort of help out with those expectations, Kevin, would be to win on Friday against Utah. So let's talk more specifically about Utah coming up after this break. That is also a chance to remind you that if you are a Chiefs fan, you could be on the field at the 50-yard line inside GEHA Field for the official coin toss at a Chiefs home game this season. Visit Chiefs.com/GEHA now. Enter for a chance to win to be on the field for a once-in-a-lifetime view of the pregame coin toss. Plus, you can score other exclusive prizes. Enter for a chance to win at Chiefs.com/GEHA. GEHA is a proud partner of the Kansas City Chiefs. More KU football talk is coming up next.
Missouri, big news. It's almost your turn to get in the game because DraftKings Sportsbook is coming to the Show Me State on December 1st. Soon you'll get fast payouts when you win, a safe and secure app that's easy to use, and promos that keep the action going all season long. No wonder it's America's top-rated sportsbook app. The countdown is on. New customers can sign up right now and score $300 in bonus bets on launch day. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code KCSN. New Missouri customers sign up today and score $300 in bonus bets once we're live. That's code KCSN. The crown is yours. In partnership with DraftKings Sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 21 plus, physically present in Missouri. Eligibility and restrictions apply, subject to regulatory licensing requirements. Bonus bets are not withdrawable and expire 7 days after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see sportsbook.draftkings.com/promos.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer here with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. You should be doing 3 things right now, especially if you're on our YouTube channel. You should like the video, share a comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. We'll be live on Friday afternoon after the conclusion of KU football's final game of the regular season against Utah on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. The best way to know is to subscribe so that you'll be notified, but probably around 2:45, 2:30, about 10 to 15 minutes following the conclusion of the game, you can expect this to be live. So come hang out with us and other great KU fans and join in for our live reaction show. We're going to be talking about KU basketball later in the week. We'll have more of a little bit of a holistic breakdown of KU at the Players era. We're recording this on Monday night, so Kansas did get the win over Notre Dame 71-61. We'll talk more probably about that, more about what they do against Syracuse in their final game as well of the Players era later on this week. And also we'll be previewing UConn and KU coming up next Tuesday. And the plan right now is for us to be live Tuesday night after KU and UConn at Allen Fieldhouse. So you can subscribe to the YouTube channel then as well, so that you'll be notified when we go live after KU and UConn on the basketball court. Let's continue this conversation with KU ahead of Utah. I thought that was some really good stuff before the break about sort of, the seniors and everything that this means for KU. But let's just simply break it down as it is in this one game against Utah. This is going to be a tall task for Kansas, flat out. And I think the big question for me, Kevin, is, especially on the heels of what Utah did against K-State, is which Utah is going to show up? Because prior to that game against K-State in Salt Lake City, this Utah team was a top 10 defense basically in the country, really, really strong, especially against the run. They were ranked 12 in the college football playoff poll, so they were looking to add some style points for themselves to try to move up potentially in the college football playoff. And they go out against K-State and frankly should have lost at home. K-State had a 10-point lead with less than 4 minutes left. It took a couple of miracles from Utah to claw it back. They ended up winning the game 51-47, but in the meantime, they allowed K-State to run for 472 yards in the game. It was for Joe Jackson of K-State. He had almost 300 rushing yards. So it was really a bizarre game for Utah. And the whole time I was thinking, this is classic. It's a look-ahead game for Utah before they play Kansas, right? But yeah, so the question now becomes, which Utah do you get, I guess, especially after really what ended up being a pretty emotional win for them. It's going to be a short week. How quickly can they turn things around heading into this game? Because there is still quite a bit on the line for them. The Big 12 title game is seemingly out of the picture for Utah at this point. Both Texas Tech and BYU have wins over them, and both are ahead of them by a game in the standings. By the way, Tech plays West Virginia and BYU plays UCF. So presumably it's not totally impossible, but it would appear at this point that it's a virtual lock that Tech and BYU are going to win those games and then go on to rematch in the Big 12 title game in 2 weeks. So for Utah, that's basically out of the picture. But as I mentioned, they came into last week. We're recording this on Monday, so we'll see what the rankings say for them, this week for the CFP. But they came into the game last week at number 12, meaning they're right there in the discussion of being a potential at-large team for the college football playoff. So still a lot is on the line for Utah. They're sitting at 9-2, so obviously this would give them a double-digit win season. But yeah, the question is, how do they respond after a game against K-State where they were favored by almost 19 points? They were down 10 late. They had to claw it back. It's a short week against Kansas. They're having to travel. What do you expect maybe to see from this Utah team coming to Lawrence?
Yeah, it was surprising to see what happened on Saturday, to your point. And Joe Jackson, I think is a good running back. He is, but Nick, he set K-State's sophomore single game rushing record in the first half. So just with his performance by halftime, he had already set their single game rushing record for a sophomore. And you think of Utah being this really physical program, right? That's at the identity of what Kyle Whittingham and those guys, that's what they have built is Utah is not always going to outskill you. They are going to beat you up and beat you physically. And a lot of the success that they had in the Pac-12 was based around being the biggest, baddest program around in the Pac-12 and pushing people around. And so and I'm not saying that they aren't a very physical team. They are, but that's what made that sort of 472 rushing yards jump up and make you say, oh my gosh. And as Chris Kleiman said after the game, and I think Kyle Whittingham said it again today, a lot of it was A-gap power, right? Like it wasn't, hey, you're tricking us with what you're doing. It was, we're lining up and we're putting our face mask through your face mask. And so there are some things that Kansas could maybe take from that. I saw Whittingham saying we're going to get that fixed, this week, basically. But I do think that the game plan is something that Kansas can take something from. And what I mean by that is I think this is a game you really want to lean on Daniel Highshaw and Le'Shawn Williams and try and be physical between, maybe not even just between the tackles, between the guards. I think, lining up Kobe Baines next to Bryce Foster and Amir Herring has really stepped up of late as well. I think this is a game where you try to say, hey, let's get downhill in a hurry, and mash these guys with this, have some Jalen runs off of that, and make the passing part, I don't want to say secondary, but really emphasize the running game part of it. And it's not necessarily because, hey, Utah just gave up 472 yards and KU can go out there and do that. What it is more of is, Nick, I think you don't want to get into a game where you're trying to win a 45-42 game. You just don't. And I think the way that you can change that, and the way that Lance Leipold has previously honestly had success against, more talented teams, especially when he was building KU up, is to shorten the game. And I think the way that you do that in this game is by having a really physical run game and sort of building out from that as your base.
Yeah, I agree with you, because we've talked about it on a number of shows. We talked about it heading into the Iowa State game. It feels like this team at times has tried to just have the game plan be Jalen, go make something happen and go win the game. And that's kind of backfired for them, quite frankly, in several games this season. And so this is an opportunity, especially with a guy like Daniel Highshaw, who's been looking really good down the stretch of the season. And this is his senior day. Yeah, he seems like a guy you definitely want to get the ball to. And on that note, this is a game where, Kevin, if you don't set the tone physically, Utah definitely will, right? Yeah, so sure. You want to be the aggressor, I think, from that standpoint. You want to be the team that's sort of setting the tone. And you would know this better than anybody, Kevin, but they always talk about offensive linemen love to run block because they love to just push guys. That's the best part of what they do. And so, yeah, let Bryce Foster do that. Let Kobe Baines do that. Let those guys on the interior try to move some bodies around and set the tone against Utah, right? Because you do have to assume that Utah, coming off of a game like that against K-State, maybe there's a little bit of doubt in the minds of some of those guys in that front seven for Utah, like, oh crap, like, can we really stop this, right? And then you put that down in their minds a little bit more to open the game, maybe if you're Kansas and run the ball with success against them, that can really open things up. You mentioned not wanting to win in a shootout, just to sort of outline how much I agree with that. Kevin, Utah, in every Big 12 game they played, besides the two losses, so besides Texas Tech and besides BYU, their two conference losses, every other conference game they've played, they've scored 42 points or more.
Yep.
And you wouldn't expect Utah to be a high-scoring, explosive offense, but they really are. They have some really, really dangerous pieces on that offensive side of the ball. And so I absolutely 100% agree with you wholeheartedly. You do not want to turn this into a shootout for a variety of reasons. One, KU has not won a shootout this season when they've tried to make it a shootout. They haven't won that. And two, any opportunity you have to have your defense be on the field less feels like a win for Kansas. So that maybe also adds another level of let's establish the run game, because you don't want your defense out there for as much as they were against Iowa State, I don't think, with some of the struggles they face. So yeah, I agree. Everything leading into this game for me screams offense, try to establish the run first and kind of lean on that a little bit to help out your defense, to maybe lean into maybe some of the doubts that Utah may have after a game like they had against K-State. And also you've got a guy like Daniel Highshaw who truly epitomizes the idea of running through somebody's face, right? Like if you were to think of the physical embodiment of that mantra, it's Daniel Highshaw, right? And he seems to be fully healthy. He seems to be in a place where he's going to be able to do that at a high level. And so lean into that, right? Lean into all those things and try to set the tone early against this Utah team.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think, when you look at, I hated seeing the news about John Henry Daly, the Utah defensive end, who's the only two players in the only two edges in the Big 12 who are higher graded are the two Texas Tech guys, which of course that group is absurd. Like they almost shouldn't count, right? So the best outside of Texas Tech was John Henry Daly, and so for him to be out with an injury that is feared to be season ending and all of that, you really hate to see that. But it's also something where you can't count on, okay, the pass rush isn't going to get home just because that guy isn't there. But you are bringing in another defensive end who's not him. And I think you have a chance to maybe generate some push up front. I like this Utah group of linebackers. I was joking around with you before we shot, just, full disclosure for everybody. We were looking at Pro Football Focus grades, and I love Lander Barton. He is so much fun to watch. He's their third highest graded linebacker. And so if that guy's your first, is your highest graded linebacker, he's a really good player. If he's your third, that's a pretty good linebacking group. And so you look at the back end too, it's a group that's really tough to throw the ball against. And so I'm not saying, hey, abandon the pass, but I am saying pick and choose your moments, right? And lean on the run game. And then, when you get a chance, when you get extra guys in the box and you get them doing some different things to try and slow your running game down, maybe you get a chance to go over the top or try and hit on a pass here or there just to kind of make them back off. But this is absolutely a game that I would approach where I would say we've seen multiple games, Nick, where Kansas has barely had any possessions early in the game. The Oklahoma State game was one of those. The Missouri game, unfortunately, was one of those. The Iowa State game, you had one possession in the first quarter and all of that. Kansas's ideal strategy, I think, is to do that to Utah, to treat this almost like you're a military academy team and you want to have the 14 to 18 play drive that keeps your defense off the field, but also, like you said, maybe instill some doubt in that Utah defense, especially coming off of that K-State win. And so lean on the run. Daniel Highshaw said today, it was a good question that was asked him because he was on the injury report a week ago and then was off and looked pretty good, I thought, against Iowa State. He says he's feeling really good. And so, kind of try and ride those guys and see if maybe the running game can put you in a position to win this one.
Well, and there are things you can do with Jalen Daniels that can act as an extension of the run game. First of all, he can just run it himself. Yep. But also, the guy that I love the most at the wide receiver position is Cam Pickett. And, what he's the best at is running after the catch, right? There are opportunities that you can get in the ball and sort of, they call them short passes, extension of at sections of the run, right? And those are going to be easy confidence building throws for Jalen as well. So I think there are still plenty of ways that you can incorporate, some of more passing game into this as well. That helps, with that also, because I love Cam Pickett. Get him the ball in space. Let him use the ability after the run, after the catch. And again, maybe that helps boost Jalen Daniels' confidence, because you and I both know that Jalen Daniels is inherently, a very, very confident individual, right? He fully believes in himself, but there are games this season where that's maybe been a little bit of a detraction for him, right? And so where he's trying to do too much, and so maybe get him some easy throws. You've talked about that earlier in the season with some games where, hey, it's great that you want to try to get the ball down the field deep, passing it deep down the field with guys like Emmanuel Henderson, but if you can't connect on those throws, right, that doesn't help. What does help is building some confidence with some maybe shorter passes to help Jalen Daniels get going, to where then when you have your 1 to 2 opportunities or 3 opportunities down the field with Emmanuel Henderson, he has a little more confidence to make those types of plays. So I think you can absolutely incorporate Jalen Daniels into it. And heck, Utah also with the quarterback run, they've got a young guy that they utilize at quarterback to run the ball named Bird Ficklin. Maybe a little bit of Isaiah Marshall. Maybe you use more of him, right? I mean, this is your last opportunity to do that this season if you don't, win the game. So
dust everything off.
Yeah, I mean, truthfully, right?
Empty the cannons. Like, there's no reason to leave anything left in the chamber at this point. And so they've talked about sort of the package that they have for Zeke Marshall in the past. Maybe this is a game where instead of 1 touch, 2 touches, you up that to 5 touches, 8 touches. I would not have any problem with that, especially given that I think part of the reason K-State was able to run the ball, yes, it was A-gap power and all the things that go along with that, but also you always have to respect Avery Johnson's legs. Even when he's handing the ball off, you have to say, okay, is he booting? Where's he going? Because of the big play runner that he is. And Jalen's a good runner. People respect Jalen, but I think Zeke takes that up, maybe another level because of the speed that he has.
100%. Speaking of the Utah defense on the other side going up, or the Utah offense, excuse me. Speaking of the Utah offense going up against the other side of this KU defense, Devin Dampier was maybe one of the upper echelon quarterbacks in the transfer portal in the offseason, right? That was honestly a big reason why Utah struggled so much last season, is they just didn't have consistent quarterback play. They went out to try to solve that with Dampier. And Dampier's been solid, right? I mean, he's been solid. 19 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. I think he has 7 more rushing touchdowns as well this season. He's a dual threat guy. He's been solid. He's been solid this year. He's done a much better job of taking care of the football. I mentioned Bird Ficklin, who had 3 rushing touchdowns against K-State. He's a bit more of a dynamic guy that they utilize. You've talked in the past, Kevin, about how much you enjoy Wayshawn Parker, the running back. So this is a Utah offense that is certainly dangerous. And obviously with the way the Kansas defense kind of struggled against Iowa State to get off the field, there's some real concern there, I think, on the other side of the ball.
Yeah, DK McDonald called it the most varied run game that Kansas has faced all year, and obviously that's not what Kansas fans want to hear when you've kind of struggled to stop the run the way that they have. I would add Dampier. They brought it up today at the press conference. Dampier is a really physical runner. He'll run through tackles and things like that, and Kansas can't have the kind of missed tackles that we've seen in the past. You have to have somebody bring that guy down. And so, when you go from that to all of a sudden Ficklin, who, like you said, is a more dynamic guy, and the different things that they can do with those guys, it really makes that running game dangerous. And then just when you're focused on that, I mean, they've got tight end that they really enjoy throwing it to. Ryan Davis is a good player, the wide receiver. And so, and we haven't even gotten to, maybe the strength of the entire Utah team, which is they've cut 2 potential first round offensive tackles. And so when that's a big part of your offense, of your running game, is not just, hey, the guy's carrying the ball, but also, we've got 2 guys who are playing on Sundays on either edge. And Kansas has struggled to set the edge, in particular when you're looking at the way that Kansas has struggled against the run. It's a matchup that I'm not saying Kansas can't do well against, but I am saying it's going to take a really high-level effort. I think a lot of it reminds me, Nick, and it's funny because after KU lost to Missouri, fans were asking us, like, okay, who's the most like Missouri still left on the schedule? And we said Texas Tech and Utah. And, a big part of the reason was Texas Tech, just the sheer amount of talent. But Utah was because of the physicality that Utah has, the fact that they had guys on both lines, that they had an NFL defensive end and John Henry Daly, who isn't going to play in this one. But obviously Missouri had the 2 really good defensive ends. Missouri had a really physical offensive line. And on a play-by-play basis, Nick, Kansas accepted that challenge pretty well in that game and got after it physically. They got gashed on 4 or 5 runs that wound up being huge, game-changing runs. But from a play-by-play basis, they did a good job of matching Missouri's physicality. And so whatever Wheaties they ate that morning before taking on Missouri as a defense, the physicality that they played with, they're going to need to replicate that breakfast heading into the Utah game, because I'm not saying they can't hold up against Utah's physicality, but I think it's going to take a Missouri-like effort for them to hold up against that offensive line.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that for KU to win this game, you're probably going to need one of, if not the best performance from your defense of the season, right?
Sure.
Like, I don't think that's an understatement. I mean, I think Arizona probably was the best defensive performance of the season for you. Like, I mean, you had like the West Virginia game, and early in the season you had some different games like that. But in conference play outside of West Virginia, it's been basically UCF and Arizona were probably your 2 top defensive games. And against UCF, you were bad for the first, quarter and a half of that game that got you in a hole. So I think it's pretty clear to me that you need the defense to have probably its best performance of the season to really put yourself in position to win this game. And hell, you may need one of the best performances from the offense this season to win the game too, right? That's kind of, I think, how good Utah could be in this game, because I think some of that will just come down to, kind of circling back to what we were talking about towards the beginning of the show, like some of it may just come down to what level Utah comes in at, right? With what we talked about earlier in the show too. So a lot of different factors involved with that, but yeah, I look at this defense and again, the less amount of time that the defense is on the field with the offense having the ball, I think is a positive, because it is going to be a tough challenge for them to really slow down this Utah team. Again, I mentioned Utah in every conference game besides their 2 losses, they've scored at least 42 points. So if they score 42 points, I can tell you for sure I don't like KU's chances to win this game. Sure. So you're talking about having to hold them under that, and probably significantly under that for me to feel really good about KU's chances. But we'll see how things play out. Let's take one more quick break. We'll come back. We'll get to some of our players to watch, some final thoughts, and game predictions. We'll do all that coming up next.
My name is Terrell Jolly. A lot of people call me TJ, founder and CEO of Integrity Capital Management. So Integrity Capital Management originally started out as a property management firm, but we slowly transitioned to what is described as an incremental development firm that's focused on situational housing. I know most people say affordable, but we believe in creating housing for people that are actually in need and built to the end user. I believe everyone needs a home, because when you have home, you have hope. The reality is that when you're building a business, one thing you don't think about is like what a true banking relationship means. And, I had the honor and privilege of meeting Debbie early on in my career when I was just trying to get going. And as a small business, it's really challenging at times because people don't understand the concept or not believe the longevity because you're just getting started. But Debbie was willing to take a chance on me, be patient with me. I almost look at it like a grassroots initiative. She's seen and believe what I'm about. Anybody that's really true about their business and want to get some things done, I would definitely trust hands down Emprise, because Deb's team, along with Aaron and Jackie and all the amazing people that work behind the scenes, even from the treasury side, I would say, hey, give them an opportunity, because you won't be disappointed and you will actually be in hands that actually somebody care and that will see you from start to finish.
This is the Peggy Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer here with Kevin Flaherty. If you've not already, please subscribe. Apple, Spotify on audio, leave us a 5-star rating and review. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN, because we're going to be doing more live shows. We'll be live on Friday afternoon following KU in Utah, and we will be live over the course of the KU basketball season after big KU basketball games, including we're planning on being live after KU and UConn next Tuesday for that game Tuesday night. So best way to know when we go live is to subscribe so that you're notified. And you can also leave us a comment. You can like our videos and join in on the conversation with other great KU fans as well. And we appreciate those of you that do that, as it helps us grow our channel. All right, let's talk about some players to watch heading into this game. We'll start with the KU offense. Who is a player to watch for you on this offense for this game, Kevin?
To me, it's Daniel Highshaw. I mean, senior day. I mean, it is the obvious pick, but when you're coming off of the game that Utah just had, I do think Utah is going to bow up a little more against the run game. It's going to be something they're going to emphasize this week. But Daniel Highshaw is a guy that, Nick, we talked about in the offseason and in fall camp. He looked like an all Big 12 running back. And I think when you looked at this season early on, he was pressing and then he got hurt. And so we haven't seen as much of sort of peak Daniel Highshaw as you and I saw in the spring and in fall camp. This is the time for peak Daniel Highshaw to show up. Don't be worried about, hey, we don't want to give him 20 carries. We don't. The season's over if you lose today, and it's his final game as well. Give that guy the ball and see what he can do, and see if you can enjoy success in the run game. The other thing I like about Daniel Highshaw, Nick, is that Highshaw can make your offensive line look a lot better than it is, because of the way he breaks tackles and the way that he's just kind of a freak in the way that he can shake loose from even really good hits. And so there's going to be times in this game where Kansas is going to have to get really difficult yardage. And I think Daniel Highshaw is a guy that can do that for them, even if you don't block up a play perfectly. And if you do block it up perfectly, I think he has the talent to have a really big day. And so for me, Daniel Highshaw is sort of the easy pick in this one. Take the parking brake off, and all those things, and let's see the Daniel Highshaw that we thought we would be seeing all year long. And again, like, I'm not saying it's his fault that we haven't seen him to this point, because he has been banged up, and he has, they have emphasized other things within the offense as well. But this is a game that I think I would love to just, let's have the best game of Daniel Highshaw's career in his final game at the booth.
Just to be clear, if you hadn't picked Daniel Highshaw, I would have picked him, because for basically everything you just said. Instead, I will kind of piggyback off that, and I'll pick from the offensive line. I'll go with Kobe Baines. He's a guy that I know you really like, Kevin, and he's somebody that is going to need to be opening some holes for Daniel Highshaw. And kind of a combo. I kind of want to go with him plus Bryce Foster.
Go for it.
Because those are two guys that are also playing in their last games for KU as well. And so, or I guess their potential last games if they lose.
Last games at the booth.
Last games at the booth. Yeah, last games at the booth. There you go. So, yeah, I'll look for those guys to sort of create some opportunities in the middle. As you mentioned, K-State, truthfully, that's where they had a lot of their success. They were not trying to be cute about it. And I think when you have a guy in Bryce Foster who is an NFL-level center at 6'5", 330, part of the reason why he's an NFL level center is that size. Put it to use, right? Let him drive downfield. Let him block guys. Kobe Baines, same deal. Let him, move some guys off the ball down the field. So I'll be keeping an eye on that. Again, to go along with Daniel Highshaw, what kind of holes can they open up for him? And then what can he do with the ball in his hands, right? Because you're right. Unfortunately, another reason why Devin Neal is so beloved, I'm on a long list of reasons why he is so beloved. One of the biggest things about him, though, is that he was healthy and was able to play for his entire career, right? And that kind of goes back to, the best abilities, availability. And unfortunately for Daniel Highshaw, out of his control has been some of those injuries that have racked up over the course of his career. And, he's been pretty open about it with us the several times we've talked to him about his process, his mentality. You mentioned Lance Leipold talking about seeing him develop mentally, right? Where you can understand why a player like Daniel Highshaw would really get down dealing with injuries, right? Yeah. Here's his chance now, potentially feeling good hanging this last game at the booth for him to just run wild, and go showcase what he can do best. So I hope he does get that opportunity. He's going to need some up from his offensive line. So I'm going to go with Bryce Foster and Kobe Baines in the middle of that offensive line to hopefully create some space for him. And again, obviously, Jalen Daniels, that's going to be his last game in the booth as well. So certainly be keeping an eye on him and kind of, how he performs in this game as well. So flipping over to the defense, Kevin, KU defense, who is a player that you're going to be keeping an eye on for the KU defense?
For me, it's Bengali Kamara. And, for a few reasons. One, I think he's a playmaker. And if Kansas is going to have success in this game, they need to have a day where they can put Utah behind the chains, where you can get Utah out of the running offense that they want to have. And I think even when you do that, he's a guy that can have success as a pass rusher and give you, some oomph from that standpoint. But the other part is he's missed some tackles this year, Nick. He's been a guy that, they've kind of struggled to set the edge, and some of it has been him being out of position at times. And he's not unique in that. I'm not trying to, level the blame of the run defense on Bengali Kamara. Rather, it is to say, if he really takes this to heart and says, you know what, like I'm going to be in the right spot and I am going to fit the run correctly, then Kansas has a chance. I really believe that. I think that if he helps them set one edge, then I think that it's a spot where Kansas can potentially put Utah into some situations where they don't want to be in. And so Bengali Kamara is the guy that I'm watching. They need him to to have some tackles for loss. But more than that, Nick, they need him to not miss tackles, and they need him to fit the run properly. And if he does those things, then I think it's going to go a long way toward making Kansas's defense at least viable in this game.
I am going to be keeping an eye on Lyric Rawls.
All right.
And I think it's for some of the reason actually that you outlined with Bengali Kamara. Lyric Rawls this season has been at his best coming downhill, making big hits, making big plays. This is a game where they're probably going to need some of that, right? And so I think he's a guy that I would circle from the secondary that can make those things happen, that can make those plays happen, especially if Utah is going to try to be physical, right? I think, truthfully, I like the Bengali Kamara pick because he's one of KU's more physical players, and that's why I'm going with Lyric Rawls, because he's one of KU's more physical players, and I think we'll need that physicality in a game like this. So that's why I'm going to keep an eye on him just to see, can he come up and maybe make some big hits in the run game and help KU slow this thing down for Utah running the football, because that's really when I think he's been at his best this season, is when he's been able to just flow downhill and play more instinctually. I think that's really probably when he's been at his best this season. So can he do more of that in this game, make a couple big hits, and really help out KU in the run game in that area? And then, in the secondary, I think also he'll play a role there as well. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. He's one of KU's most experienced players in the secondary, so he'll have to help out some of those young guys who have had up and down seasons, right? I mean, Austin Alexander, I think, has been in the spotlight a little bit this year. He's had some tough games, but he's had some really nice plays, right? Jalen Todd, obviously, has been really, really solid as well. So Lyric Rawls, I think, will play a role in that also. All right, Kevin, it's the moment of truth. Kansas, last game of the season, fighting for bowl eligibility against a pretty tough Utah team. Do you think the Jayhawks can get it done on Black Friday?
It's going to be really tough, Nick. And I think part of that is that Kansas isn't coming in with the most confidence, from their last performance. And I think that Utah is a really good team. I love Kansas's defensive tackle group. I think those guys will absolutely battle you. And when you go back and watch the Missouri game, they gave as good as they got in that game. And they were a big part of being the engine of the defense that they've talked about wanting to be. But where Kansas has got, so to speak, has been more on the edges in the second level. And so I think if Kansas plays well at those spots, if you're fitting the run correctly, if you're setting the edges, then you'll have a chance potentially. But ultimately, just saying that, Nick, that's been something that Kansas hasn't done super well over the course of this season. And when we talk about the way that Kansas can maybe establish the run and be a physical team and win this game that way, that's not something that Kansas has done a ton this season, where you've looked back and said, Kansas won this game because they controlled the game on the ground. It's something we've said about this program in the past, and I think that Lance Leipold and crew do a really good job of getting their team up for really physical games, right? They almost take it as a challenge of, hey, we're not going to be out-toughed in this game. We're going to push you around. And ultimately, a lot of what their struggles have been this year haven't been because they've gotten pushed around. It's been because they've been in the wrong spot, which is something totally different. And all of that is a really long way to say, I think it's tough to see Kansas changing that in a week, and especially a short week. And so I do think Kansas is going to come out and compete. I think there's going to be fire, but ultimately I think Utah's strengths kind of align with Kansas's weaknesses in a lot of ways. And so I have Utah winning this one. Let's say Kansas does keep Utah below 42, but I still think, 35-24, somewhere around in that range.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you in the sense that this feels like a game where Utah will probably have to make some missteps of their own, and Kansas will have to play pretty well to really put themselves with a real chance to win it. And as you mentioned, we haven't really seen that from Kansas this year, right? And you're 11 games in. So is it are you able to flip that switch and turn what has been a team that's been, quite frankly, a little bit unclutch for the majority of the season into a team that is able to maybe capitalize off of potential, mistakes that Utah may make. I don't know. It's hard to see. I agree with you though. I do get the sense that this team will probably come out and fight. We'll know pretty early on, I think, about that. To be quite honest with you, the start of the Iowa State game was just so disappointing. I have a hard time believing that Lance Leipold would allow the team to have a start like that again. So I'm expecting some early fire from KU because of that. But even still, yeah, this feels like a game where Utah maybe just might be able to overwhelm Kansas, especially defensively with some of their physicality. So I'll go with Utah as well. I think I'll go 38-21 Utah in this one. But I do think Kansas will show a little bit of fight. But again, kind of like we talked about earlier in the show, does it really make a difference what Kansas looks like in this game? If you end up, 5-7 is 5-7, right? You are what your record says you are. So I don't know. It'll be an interesting offseason for Kansas. We'll have plenty of time to get into it. Potentially, the season will continue for Kansas if they do win, right? I mean, I would love nothing more than to be proven wrong. Daniel Highshaw has a monster game. Maybe the Kansas defense is able to force a couple turnovers, which they've had moments in games this season where they haven't been able to do that, or they've had, something happen that's negated turnovers. Maybe that doesn't happen in this game. Maybe they capitalize with a couple turnovers, and we're sitting here talking about, going to Shreveport, Louisiana, potentially for whatever the hell bowl is there. I don't even remember what the name of the bowl is, but yeah, that would be fantastic for Kansas, because it's so often I think we've had this conversation, or just I think you look around the country and this is a conversation where one win versus one loss doesn't necessarily feel that significant, but man, 6-6 versus 5-7 feels like such an astronomical difference.
Yeah.
What this program would be in terms of momentum into the offseason, in terms of going to a bowl game, in terms of, adding those extra practices and so on and so forth. Like, there's just so many things that would make this feel like such a drastically different season if you win this game and are able to go on to a bowl game, maybe even win a bowl game too. So that's obviously what's on the line for Kansas. But again, it'll be certainly a very tall task. Kevin and I will be there. We will be, watching it, and we'll be live after the game as well on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks TCSN, breaking ball down Friday afternoon. We are going to talk more KU basketball as well later in the week. Also, they're in the middle of the Players Era tournament. We're recording this Monday night. Kansas defeated Notre Dame. If you're listening to this in the future, tell us what happened between KU and Syracuse from the future. I would appreciate that. But we'll talk more about that. We'll do a little bit more of a big picture, full recap of the entire Players Era tournament for KU later this weekend. And then we'll be previewing KU and UConn next Tuesday. So you'll be hearing it from us later in the week. Happy Thanksgiving. If you don't hear from us prior to Thanksgiving, hope everyone has an opportunity to enjoy some time with loved ones and family, an opportunity to be thankful, and so on and so forth. We are certainly thankful for all of you that have tuned in throughout this season, since we started this whole thing now 2 years ago. And we hope that you'll continue to join us over the course of the remainder of whatever football season is left after KU and Utah. And then, of course, for basketball season all the way through the spring. But until next time, he's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer, and we will talk to you again very soon. See you.